Hello everyone, welcome to the workshop session between myself, Kate Scantlebury, and Kathryn Milne. Hi Kath. And we're going to be focusing on a multimodal material approach to science and science education. Next slide. So we wanted to give you an idea of who we are and where we're from. I'm originally from Adelaide, Australia, and I came to the United States in the late 80s to do my doctorate. And Kath, do you want to give your background?
I came to the United States in 2000 to do a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania. And I thought I was only going to be here for a couple of years, but I never left. So Kate and I have been working together on a number of projects, and we're really excited to be challenging you to think about the world maybe in a different way. We shall see.
So the photos here, on the first one, the top left-hand corner, we're with our friend Anita Hosseson, who is a researcher at Uppsala University in the Center for Gender Research, where I'm also a visiting professor. And she too has a chemistry background. And so Kath and I have been working on projects that look at chemistry and new materialism and material feminism. We also went to Falling Water, which is a Frank Lloyd Wright building in Western Pennsylvania, to see that wonderful architecture. And we were also able to spend some time in Rome before being at the European Science Ed Conference a couple of years ago, when we could all get together face to face. And so that's the bottom right-hand corner.
So we're really excited to be presenting this to you, and we look forward to seeing you in the future, but even though it will be virtual.
So we're basing our workshop around the work written by Isabel Stengers, when she's focused on another science is possible and a manifesto for what she's called slow science. Isabel Stengers is a Belgian philosopher. Her science background is in chemistry, and then she went into philosophy of science. And many years ago, she was a keynote speaker at the European Science Ed Conference in Lyon, which Kath and I also attended. And she really inspired people with her talks and the way she frames thinking about science and the doing of science. So we hope you enjoy reading her book, and we're going to enjoy being able to discuss her book and what it means to science education when we get a chance to see you face to face in June. So, next slide, Kath.
So this is me, and this is, we'd like you to think about what are things that you care about and what are important to you in terms of your identity as a scholar, or your emergent identity as a scholar. And this tells you a little bit about me. I always believe that what I stand for, I should also do. So this is my desk. I like people to have things they can play with when they come in. And I have an open door policy. So anyone who comes to my office, has something to play with while they're waiting to find me. And of course, some of the publications, Kate and I have a co-edited book that's here as well. But I'd like you to also, I've told you the answers, but maybe you can also see whether I actually live what I say I live. So that is me.
And then the next slide, Kath.
Yep.
So my approach is a little bit different to what Kath was doing, in that she's a department chair. And even before lockdown, she went to her office on campus every day of the week. I don't have those sorts of responsibilities, so I do a lot of work at home. And in fact, I haven't been at my university office campus for 2 years because we're still on, working off campus at my institution. But I wanted to share some of the books that have me thinking, and what we call these wanderings, and getting me to think about things differently. So next, Kath.
Yep.
So I think this is over to you.
Okay, so you might be wondering, okay, that's all very nice, but what are we here for? So, and what's this multimodal material approach? What are they talking about? So we would like you to start thinking a little bit about how this approach, this multimodal approach, could be used for research. So by multimodal, at least me, Kate might want to jump in here and say something. For me, multimodal means valuing a variety of ways of working with the world and communicating about the world. So I, over the time that I've been a scholar, more and more, I've been excited by the possibilities of thinking about the role of the material world in how we come to know and how we come to value the world around us. So a multimodal approach using various modes of representing your wonderings and what you know has become very important to me in both my scholarship, my research, and in my teaching. So this image, for example, is taken from a class that I teach here to undergraduates.
Yeah, and I think the rethinking of how we go about presenting and then representing knowledge becomes really important in the multimodal material approach. That text has one way that we're very comfortable in showing what we know, but how can we present our knowledge in other sorts of ways? And how does material impact that knowledge? And has been a rethinking for myself about how to go about these things, and in that regard.
And I mean, really, it's not only that, it's also, I think, Kate, thinking about the fact that by ignoring the material world in much of science education, we've actually left out, as Barad would say, half the universe, right? So we've actually left out half the universe. So what we present as science education becomes incredibly malnourished if we ignore the material world. So that's what
and the agency of that world too, Kath, isn't it?
Exactly.
Traditional science and science education spend a lot of time examining the material world, but not necessarily interacting with it or being entangled with it, as you say, Karen Barad would refer to. So with this particular workshop, we wanted to say, what are our goals and how are we going to get there?
Right.
Next slide.
So one of the things we'd like you to think about are goals. So obviously Kate and I have goals for the presentation that we're putting together today, but we also want you to think about what are goals, what should they be like, and what's my stance on goals. So one of the things that we want you to think about is, what is a goal, to start off with? And I think very traditionally, particularly in education and maybe in science, we think about goals as something that we want to get to. So we start in an initial place, what we might call an initial situation or condition. And if we're thinking about learning goals, that's where learners start, right? And then we want the learner or ourselves to go from that condition to a target condition. And often the target condition gets communicated to people as goals. Now, how you go from A to B is a space that really is, that we don't know a lot about. We call it the challenge space. So the challenge space helps us go from where we are to maybe work towards the goals that we have. This is really a metaphor for learning. And what we'd like you to think about is, can you think why this might be? You might say, oh, I've already thought of my goals, but can you think why this approach might be sort of considered to be a little bit limited, both for your learning goals and for learning goals more generally. And then we'd like you to think about goals a little bit differently, because what we're going to try and convince you about now is that maybe our goals could be a bit fuzzier. So we're going to talk about fuzzy goals for this workshop.
So perhaps as we move to the next slide, you could think about what are your goals for this institute and also this particular workshop as someone who's engaging with and beginning to learn about slow science. So Kath is the expert.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, Kate, but thank you. So excuse me. So, and what we want you to think about is, in thinking about fuzzy goals, so we want you to think about fuzzy goals, right? For your fuzzy goals for these workshops. And you may have heard of fuzzy goals before, but in thinking about, but our influence for fuzzy goals was actually Dave Gray, Sonny Brown, and James Macanufo, who described fuzzy goals in a book called Game Storming as how you imagine the future, which is uncertain. So one of the challenges with education is very often when we think about education, we're thinking about education, what informs that education is the past, and we're educating for the present. So fuzzy goals help us be comfortable thinking for the future. And think about this. In all knowledge work, so in all work where we are reproducing or producing knowledge, goals are fuzzy. And think about this further. Following a direct pathway from point A to point B does not allow space for anything else. It doesn't allow space for intuition. It doesn't allow space for creativity. It doesn't really allow space for exploration and hypothesis making. Fuzzy goals can suggest a general direction while also encouraging you to explore with others opportunities and sidebars. Fuzzy goals contain elements of the cognitive. So of course we want you to learn something that you value, but they also have an emotional component to them. So fuzzy goals help you be passionate and evocative and energetic and sensory, so that you can produce tangible artifacts that can be shared with others. And also there's a space there for movement, for embodying some ideas. So that's why we think fuzzy goals are so important. And what we'd like you to think about are, what are your fuzzy goals for this workshop?
But Kath, when you bring up a word like movement, are you thinking, does that refer more to our movement in thinking or perspective or changing of those fuzzy goals? Or
I think that's one of the things about fuzzy goals, right, Kate? They are fuzzy. So that if by doing things, fuzzy goals give us the space to reimagine the goals. So the goals are suggestive, right? They're not set in stone. We're not going to develop a rubric to assess whether you've reached your goals at the end, because we recognize that the goals are to some degree emergent.
Emergent and also constantly changing then.
Right, exactly.
Because like if you got to a point with one particular goal, you would probably generate a whole series of questions or other goals to pursue.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right. So we want you to think about your fuzzy. So maybe you want to think about, what are some of the sensory elements that I want to engage with in this workshop? What are some of the emotional elements? And then what are some of the cognitive elements, right? So I want you to think about, what are your fuzzy goals for this workshop?
And I think too, we underplay the role of emotion too often in our work, because when we're really engaged and emotively connected with an idea, or in this case, the fuzzy goals, it's easier to keep engaged with it, isn't it?
Right.
And brainstorm the ideas. Yeah.
I mean, I was very influenced actually in thinking about, you reminded me of the work of Sherry Turkle, you know, who did that edited book on evocative objects, things we think with. And of course, objects are evocative because there are emotional elements, you know, there's an emotional valence to our connection, and they help us, even if they don't directly, even if we're not using them directly for our thinking, they are emotive and they get us thinking about things. Even if we're stuck, if we've got an evocative object, it helps us maybe unlock the stuckness, if you know what I mean. So
you often engage when you're thinking with ideas with a pen and a book, and physically take notes.
Yep.
So is that part of that evocative object, that connectivity to a material thing, as well as a format or a foray to write down ideas that you're having?
Great question, Kate, because I think that might be our next slide.
Yes.
So yes, and we'd like everybody in this who's doing the workshop with us to have an inspiration log. I obviously use inspiration logs myself, as Kate has talked about, but we also want you to develop an inspiration log. And on the left of this image, you can see some examples of inspiration logs that that people we work with have kept. So we want you to, it could be, and so you might say, okay, so what is an inspiration log? So an inspiration log is something where you draw and write your thinking, make connections with experiments you've done, or even just you're outside and you observe something and it's relevant to your thinking about your scholarship. And in this thinking about inspiration logs, we're influenced by the work of Linda Barry, who's an artist, and her book Syllabus really influenced our thinking about what could an inspiration log look like, and like drawing from your day, which is the example here. So we want to encourage you to write your ideas both in image and text, different colors, and so forth. And of course, here's an example of one of my inspiration logs, and it really got me thinking about the material world and its relationship to our own learning. So in this example, I had, there were students who were trying to make squishy circuits, which are using insulating and conducting dough. And some of the kids get frustrated because the material doesn't seem to be, you know, they're trying to force the dough to create the circuit, and they get frustrated. And I said to them, you have to, what is the material trying to say to you? Listen to what the material is saying. And, you know, it was an aha moment for me, and it was also an aha moment for them. So as you can see, we've got photographs here, we've got notes in different colors. And so as I said here, this squishy circuit activity really helped me to build my ideas about the interaction between matter and human.
So when I keep logs, I don't tend to do the diagrammatic and the different pens in the same way like Kath does. But what I do find myself doing, and it's an interesting reflective of how I was brought up, was that you do not write in books. So when I see friends that have taken a book, say like, you know, the Stenger's book, and write notes in the side things, and that it's just, it's just so wrong to me because it's just something we were taught as children, as kids, not to do. So over time, I would put post-it notes to tag things and key ideas. But more so, my inspirational logs are more along the lines of writing out those key ideas and then just jotting down questions that I have about those ideas, or does this connect back to something else? So it's kind of like a note keeping process. But we had talked to Kath too about how, people might look to use a digital notebook as opposed to a physical one, like the example that you've shown.
Absolutely, Kate. In fact, just like this. So this is a note from OneNote, but you could use Jamboard or any other digital application, that you have to create your own digital inspiration log. So absolutely, it could be either. It doesn't have to. It's just a way of I suppose doodling your ideas, if you want to put it that way.
And you may already have all these strategies in place. So what we'd ask you to do is to just identify a space in the way you put things together that would focus on slow science and your ideas, and build your ideas and your notes, your inspirational log around what we're going to keep talking about in this workshop. So what is this workshop is about? I think that's our next.
Oh, and so I think the first thing we'd like you to do in your inspiration log, maybe for us anyhow, is we'd like you to really think about what would you like Kate and I to know about you. So what are some, you might even want to write your story to how you got to the point you're at today. I found this really a powerful thing to do. We've in the department that I'm in here, the Department of Teaching and Learning at NYU, we're really starting to use personal narratives to look at systemic racism and its impact on the lives of all the professors actually in our department, because our professors come from a really very varied background, and it's a great way to build resources to talk about some of those issues as well. Do you want to say anything, Kate, about that?
No, I think it's up to perhaps just perhaps there are images that are important that really represent you, or aspects about you that you might want to use in your log, some notes or whatever. It'd be just nice to get to know you better through them.
Exactly, because we're going to ask you to share them out when we're face to face.
Well, face to face through the computer screen.
Exactly, face to face in the virtual world.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
On to the next one, next slide.
So what is this workshop about?
Yes.
Take it away, Kate.
So one of a key feminist scholar is Donna Haraway, who is shown in this photo with one of her dogs. But one of the things that Haraway says, and has written a book about it too, or she talks about staying with the trouble. So problematizing situations, questioning everything, and then keeping on with that. So that's also going to be a common thing that we'll come back to stay with the trouble, to shake things up, to think about things differently, and the challenges that puts us in. And it can be a very uncomfortable space to be pushing on that, but it does help one move along, challenge those fuzzy goals, try to articulate those fuzzy goals. So in this, when we proposed this session, we wanted you to explore and think about the different ways to think about science and science education, and stay with the trouble in this restructuring of how you might think about those two concepts, and then how you and and all of us as humans get entangled with the material world. So the interaction between humans and the material world. So we wanted to bring these ideas to the fore and engage you with them, with the thought of providing you the sorts of resources to help think about what does science education need to be like to educate young people for the future, not the present or the past. Kath, do you want to chime in more about like the futurists? Because you've done work around the futurist stuff.
I have. I know. I think before we do more, I think it's just challenging you. You know, I suppose part of our conversation around Donna Haraway's idea of staying with the trouble is that we don't know what your experiences have been like in science education so far, but we often meet people who are convinced that they have the answer. So they are convinced that that we need goals, that rubrics are great, that constructivism is the only way of thinking about structuring learning experiences.
That science standards will get all children to learn science.
That science is cognitive, you know, and we could go on and on. But we want you to really challenge those ideas and to think about them, to always ask questions, you know, about taken for granted positions that are often presented as though they are the right thing to do. And so that's really why we want to challenge you. We want you to challenge any ideas that you are presented with, even ours for that matter, because who knows? We don't have all the answers, but we do want you. So that's why Donna Haraway's Staying with the Trouble is really our theme, if you like, for these two, this workshop and the one that you will do in the future. And of course, we'd like you to think about, okay, so I've listened to Kath and Kate. What are my goals for this workshop? So we'd still like you in your inspiration log to start to think, maybe draw images, write some ideas down, create some metaphors about what your goals are, recognizing that the future is uncertain, and that's okay. Recognizing that maybe our goals will change, and that's okay. Recognizing that always with knowledge work, goals must be fuzzy. I think that's it, Kate. That's all I wanted to say.
So the perhaps we go to our next slide then, Kath.
Yep, done.
So with that in mind, we wanted you to begin with a foundational question from your current thinking, which is basically to say, what is science? And at this point, what we would ask you to do is to stop the video and go and do a task and find or produce images that answer this question, what is science for you? And to, you know, put that work, that first task also into your inspiration log.
Stop the video now.
And so when you've done that, come back to us. We'll see you soon.
So welcome back. You've now recorded your fuzzy goals and you've started filling up your inspiration log. So we wanted you to explore this question a little bit further. And we want you to become entangled in the material in a different way. So you've come back for a millisecond because we're going to send you off again. And what we want you to do is we want you to read two things, and one of them is going to take you a bit longer than the other. We want you to read Isabel Stenger's Another Science is Possible, a manifesto for slow science. And we want you to read Bruno Latour's has critique run out of steam from matters of fact to matters of concern? And there is a connection here because Stengers, in her work on Another Science is Possible, uses as one of her influences the work that Bruno Latour did on matters of fact and matters of concern. So these two publications are connected, and we'd like you to read them both. And so stop your video, stop the video now and go off and have some fun reading. Is there anything?
And they will take you the time to read. So
Stengers is not an easy read, but she will reward a deep engagement with the ideas that she's presenting. Enjoy. So welcome back, everybody. And so obviously you've probably written some things in your inspiration log already about the connections that you're making with the readings that we asked you to do of Bruno Latour and Isabel Stengers. Now we have some questions that we'd like you to think about a little, some specific questions. You may have already thought of these questions as you were reading Stengers, but in order to sort of provide you with some resources for the second workshop that you'll be doing with us, we have a couple of questions that we'd like you to maybe address more specifically. And the first question that we'd like you to address is, what does Stengers have to say about the relationship between public understanding and understanding in science? Now, that's the first question that we'd like you to engage with. Kate, you want to take the second one?
Sure. I was just also though thinking about that first question, which comes out of a book, but that book was written in 2018, very much before pre-pandemic times, and yet it's such a critical question now in our current in the life we're currently living, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yes.
Everything we've experienced in the last 15 months. But however, the second question is, what is the role of matters of concern in Stengers' manifesto? And that the fact, as Kath has pointed out, that the phrase matters of concern is Bruno Latour's work.
Right. So these questions will take you some time. We'd like you to take some time to really think deeply about these questions, and we'd love you to use images, drawing and text, just as you have for the previous tasks that we've assigned you. And there are some other questions that we'd also like you, so we're going to give you the questions now that we'd also like you to engage with. You want to take this, Kate?
So you've had the chance to read through Stengers' book. So what is fast science? What is slow science? How are they different? And how can slow science help us restructure science education?
No pressure. But important questions that we'd like you to think about. And we've got some more, just some more questions that we'd like you to also engage with. What is a thought? So Stengers talks about thought collectives. So we'd love you to think about what is a thought collective from her book. So use her book. And then how does the idea of a thought collective help us to reconsider who the experts are? And, because there is a tendency to really, and I mean, we don't want to say too much because we might influence you a lot, but we were also inspired in our own thinking by some episodes in the history of science. Some of these episodes, of course, are ongoing. So, for example, those of you who are familiar with Flint, Michigan, might remember the ongoing saga of the challenge with access to drinking water, and that's clean drinking water, not drinking water laced with lead or iron. Kate and I have written with some colleagues about this case study, which we put in the references. Kate, do you want to say something more? And what is important about the Flint example is it speaks directly to this issue of what is a thought collective, and how over the history of Flint, the notion of what constituted a thought collective underwent change. So I'll leave it there. Kate, do you want to say something about this?
Not so much about Flint, but just that whole idea about, whose knowledge is valued and whose knowledge is privileged, and how that things like the thought collectives get you to rethink that. So, other examples, if people are not familiar, particularly with Flint, Michigan, people might know about thalidomide, which was a drug produced in the 1950s, or first of all, that was given to women to help offset morning sickness. And yet over time, it was found to cause birth defects in their children, the children they had in their pregnancies. However, in that particular story, it took a long time for the knowledge to be out there and for things to get done about thalidomide because of who was considered an expert in their knowledge. An outcome of thalidomide, of course, was the establishment in the United States of the FDA, the Federal Drug Authority, because the drug got renamed and remained on the market for a long time as well. And did you want to talk about Thomas Midgley, Kath?
So, of course, Thomas Midgley it's one of my favorite examples, only because when he was part of the team, and he's sort of often presented as the leader of the team that developed Freon. And when Freon was developed, it was considered to be such a wonderful development because it allowed manufacture. Of course, he was employed by General Electric to on this project, so of course that gives you some idea. But it allowed companies to replace more toxic and dangerous materials such as ammonia and hydrogen or kerosene with a chemical which was stable and didn't interact with, and chemically stable. And that was seen to be, but had all the characteristics that needed to make this compound really a great gas in refrigeration. But of course, as I say to my classes, anything that's chemically stable that has never existed before it was synthesized in nature, before it was synthesized by human beings, most likely has a problematic future. So it's a classic example, I think, of science living in the present and not thinking too much about what could the possible consequences of this substance, this chemically stable substance, be in the environment. Because if any of you know anything about Freon, you'll know that it actually, because it was so stable, made its way into the stratosphere, and of course then was a major reactant in upsetting the cycle of production of ozone in the stratosphere, leading to what is colloquially called the hole in the ozone layer. So Freon, and of course that particular environmental disaster probably activated one of the few global environmental initiatives. But of course, the impact of that is still ongoing because some of the chemicals that were designed to replace freons, chlorofluorocarbons, have other consequences, such as being powerful greenhouse gases. So, I mean, I think it's a great example for thinking about how things are connected. Okay, that's it for me, Kate.
Okay. So the last slide we have is just the references. And so you'll see there some of the work that we've cited in our presentation here. Linda Barry, who's the graphic artist, syllabus, and other works. So the chapter that Kath and I wrote with Colin and Adam, we'll have that available for you as well if you're interested. That's the one that focuses on what happened with regards to Flint and those issues. But that's what we have so far, and we look forward to talking with you and working with you at the Institute in June.
And unpacking stengers and making connections to science education. So see you, everyone.
See you in June. Bye.
Bye.